The gunshot that rang out across the dusty street of Springerville, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1883 was meant for Yates Irwin, but instead it shattered the window of the general store where Olive Dalton stood counting inventory, and that single moment changed both their lives forever. Olive dropped to the floor, heart hammering against her ribs as shards of glass rained down around her. She pressed herself against the counter, breathing hard through her nose, angry more than frightened. This was the third time this month that someone had caused trouble in town, and she was tired of it. Tired of the lawlessness, tired of the chaos, tired of everything that made life in this territory so unpredictable. Outside, she heard shouting and the thunder of hooves as whoever had fired that shot made their escape. Then boots on the wooden walkway, quick and purposeful. The door to the shop flew open. "Madam, madam, are you hurt?" Olive lifted her head to see a tall man silhouetted in the doorway, dust coating his dark hat and worn leather vest. He held a pistol in one hand, but he was lowering it carefully as he stepped inside. His eyes, she noticed even in that moment of chaos, were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "I am fine," she said curtly, rising to her feet and brushing glass from her plain cotton dress, "though I cannot say the same for Mr. Patterson's front window." The cowboy holstered his weapon and moved closer, his gaze sweeping over her as if checking for injuries despite her words. "That bullet was meant for me. I apologize for bringing trouble to your door." "Your door?" Olive arched an eyebrow. "This is Mr. Patterson's store." "Was," the man corrected gently. "I bought it from him last week. Just arrived in town yesterday to take possession. Name is Yates Irwin." Olive stared at him, processing this information. She had worked in this store for 3 years, ever since she had arrived in Springerville with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to never depend on anyone again. Old Mr. Patterson had not mentioned selling. "He did not tell me," she said, her voice flat. "He said he had a clerk who was reliable. I am guessing that is you." Yates extended his hand. "I hope you will stay on. Patterson spoke highly of your work." Olive looked at his outstretched hand but did not take it. "I do not shake hands with men who bring gunfire to my place of employment." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps or respect. He lowered his hand without comment. "Fair enough. The man who shot at me is Russ Keller. He and I have history from my cattle driving days. I did not expect him to follow me here. And yet he did." Olive crossed her arms. "Will he return?" "Not if he has any sense. The sheriff will be looking for him now." "The sheriff," Olive said with undisguised contempt, "is usually too drunk to look for his own hat." This time Yates definitely smiled. It transformed his face from merely handsome to something that might have made another woman's heart skip. Olive felt nothing. She had learned long ago to feel nothing. "You are not wrong about Sheriff Moss," Yates admitted, "but Russ is a coward at heart. He fired from ambush and ran. He would not come back for a fair fight." "There is no such thing as a fair fight," Olive said. "There are only survivors and corpses." The smile faded from Yates's face. He studied her for a long moment, and she found she could not quite read his expression. "That is a hard way to see the world." "It is an honest way." Yates nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Dalton, Olive Dalton, Miss Dalton, I would appreciate it if you would stay on. I will need someone who knows the inventory and the customers while I learn the business, and I will pay you more than Patterson did." Olive considered this. She had few options in Springerville. There was the saloon, but she would rather starve than work there. The hotel might need help, but Mrs. Chen, who ran it, had a full staff. Teaching was out of the question without proper credentials, and she had none. How much more? She asked. Yates named a figure that was nearly double what Patterson had paid. Olive kept her expression neutral, though inwardly she was calculating what this would mean. She could save more. Maybe eventually buy a small house. Stop living in the cramped room behind the laundry. "Very well," she said, "but if any more bullets come through that window, I am gone." "Understood." Yates glanced around at the mess of broken glass. "Why do I not clean this up while you finish the inventory? We can talk about how you have been running things once the glass is swept up." Olive nodded and moved back to the counter where her ledger lay. As Yates went to find a broom, she found her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the pages until they steadied. She would not allow herself to be rattled by this. She had survived far worse than a broken window. For the rest of the day, they worked in a silence that was mostly comfortable. Yates proved to be competent with the broom and hammer, boarding up the window until new glass could be ordered from Tucson. Olive finished the inventory and began showing him the ordering system Patterson had used, explaining which suppliers were reliable and which would cheat you if you were not careful with the counts. "You have a good head for this," Yates observed as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have a good head for survival," Olive corrected. "This is simply part of that. How did you end up in Springerville?" he asked, his tone carefully casual. "I do not discuss my past, Mr. Irwin. Just curious. Not many young women come to a place like this alone." "I am 24 years old," Olive said coolly. "Hardly a young girl, and I came here for the same reason anyone comes to the territories. To start over." Yates leaned against the counter, studying her again with that penetrating gaze. "Fair enough, I will not pry, but if you ever want to talk, I am a good listener." "I will not want to talk," Olive assured him. "Is there anything else you need from me today, or may I go?" "You are free to go. Thank you for staying after what happened this morning." Olive untied her apron and hung it on its peg by the back door. As she retrieved her worn shawl and small bag, she was aware of Yates watching her. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Irwin?" "Yes." "Why did you come to Springerville? You said Russ Keller was from your cattle driving days. If you wanted to start over, why not choose a place with no connections to your past?" Yates was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I am not running from my past like some people. Maybe I am just looking for a future." Olive absorbed this. "Then I hope you find what you are looking for. Good evening." She walked out into the cooling air, aware that her hands were no longer shaking. The encounter with Yates Irwin had unsettled her in a way she could not quite name. It was not fear or attraction, but rather a vague sense of unease, as if he had seen more in their brief conversation than she wanted anyone to see. The walk to the laundry took 15 minutes. Springerville was not large, perhaps 300 people at most, clustered around the White Mountains in the eastern part of Arizona Territory. It had been established as a trading post decades ago and had grown slowly but steadily. There were ranches in the surrounding area, and the town served as a hub for supplies and services. Olive had chosen it precisely because it was small enough to be safe but large enough to be anonymous. In 3 years, she had built a quiet life here. She worked 6 days a week at the store, attended church on Sundays more for appearance than faith, and kept to herself. She had no friends, no suitors, no entanglements. That was exactly how she wanted it. Mrs. Reeves, who ran the laundry with her husband, was hanging sheets when Olive arrived. "Heard there was shooting near the store today," the older woman said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Everyone all right?" "No one was hurt," Olive said. "Just a broken window. They say it was the new owner they were shooting at, Yates Irwin, I think his name is. You meet him?" "Yes. I will be continuing to work there." "What is he like?" Mrs. Reeves asked, not bothering to hide her interest. "Tall," Olive said unhelpfully. "Excuse me, I need to wash before supper." She slipped inside before Mrs. Reeves could ask more questions. Her room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk that held all her possessions. But it was clean and it was hers, and that was all that mattered. As she washed her face and changed out of her work dress, Olive tried not to think about the way Yates Irwin had looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he wanted to solve. She had encountered men like that before, men who thought they could fix whatever was broken inside her. They were always disappointed when they realized she was not broken at all. She was exactly who she chose to be. That night, lying in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep, Olive made herself a promise. She would work for Yates Irwin because the money was good and she needed it, but she would not let him get close. She would not let anyone get close. That was the only way to ensure she would never be hurt again. The next morning, Olive arrived at the store to find that Yates had already been working for hours. The broken window had been properly boarded, and he had rearranged some of the stock on the shelves. "Good morning, Miss Dalton," he said, looking up from a crate he was unpacking. "I hope you do not mind. I could not sleep, so I got an early start." "It is your store," Olive said. "You may arrange it however you like." "Actually, I was hoping to get your input. You know the customers better than I do. If I put the fabric over here, will that make sense? Or should it stay where Patterson had it?" Olive surveyed his changes with a critical eye. "The fabric should be near the notions. Women buying cloth usually need thread and needles as well, and the tools should be closer to the front. Ranchers often stop in quickly and do not want to walk to the back of the store." "That makes sense." Yates stood, dusting off his hands. "Help me move things." They spent the morning reorganizing, and Olive found herself reluctantly impressed by how easily Yates took her suggestions. Patterson had been set in his ways, resistant to any changes, but Yates seemed genuinely interested in making the store better, more efficient. "Where did you learn merchandising?" she asked as they moved the last of the tool displays to the front. "My family owned a dry goods store in Kansas," Yates said. "Worked there from the time I was big enough to reach the counter. After my parents died, my brother took it over. I decided to try something different, so I went to work on the cattle drives. Did that for 6 years. And now you are back to storekeeping." "Turns out I missed it," Yates said with a slight smile. "The cattle business is hard on a man's body, and I wanted to put down roots somewhere." "Why here?" Olive asked, then immediately regretted the question. She did not want to seem interested in his life. "I drove cattle through here a few times," Yates said. "Always liked the mountains, the air, seemed like a good place to settle. When I heard Patterson wanted to sell, I made him an offer." "And Russ Keller," Yates's expression darkened. "Russ and I had a disagreement on a drive 3 years ago. He was mistreating the horses. I called him on it. We fought. He lost. I thought he had moved past it, but apparently not." "Men do not move past things like that," Olive said. "Their pride is too fragile." "That is a harsh assessment." "That does not make it untrue." Yates regarded her thoughtfully. "You do not have a very high opinion of men, do you?" "I have a realistic opinion," Olive said. "Now, do you want me to show you the bookkeeping system, or would you prefer to figure it out yourself?" "I would appreciate your guidance." They spent the rest of the morning going over the accounts. Yates proved to be quick with numbers, asking smart questions and making notes. Olive found herself relaxing slightly. At least her new employer was not an idiot. Customers began arriving as noon approached. Olive handled most of them, introducing Yates when necessary. The townspeople were curious about the new owner, especially the women. More than one gave him appraising looks that made Olive want to roll her eyes. Cowboys were nothing special. Just men with hats and horses, prone to the same weaknesses as any other man. Around midday, A woman named Clara Winters came in. She was the daughter of one of the larger ranchers in the area, pretty in a conventional way with blonde curls and a ready smile. She had been shopping at the store for years, and Olive had always found her vapid but harmless. "Mr. Irwin," Clara said, her eyes lighting up when she saw Yates. "I heard you had purchased the store. Welcome to Springerville." "Thank you, Miss Winters," Yates said politely. Olive noted that he must have already met her, probably at church the previous Sunday. "I am having a small gathering at our ranch this Saturday," Clara continued. "Just some of the local families for supper and dancing. I would love for you to come. And you too, of course, Olive." The last part was clearly an afterthought. Olive did not take offense. She had never attended any of the social gatherings in town, and no one expected her to start now. "That is kind of you," Yates said. "I will think about it." "Please do," Clara said warmly. "It would be a wonderful way for you to meet more of your neighbors." She purchased a few items, chatted for a few more minutes, then left with a final bright smile for Yates. "She seems nice," Yates observed after she was gone. "She is hunting for a husband," Olive said bluntly. "Her father wants her married to someone who can help run the ranch. You have just made yourself a prime target." Yates looked startled, then amused. "You do not mince words, do you? I see no point in it. But you should go to the gathering if you want to integrate into the community. It will be good for business. Will you come?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I do not attend social gatherings." "Why not?" Yates asked again, his tone genuinely curious. "Because I do not want to," Olive said, her voice hardening slightly. "Is there anything else you need? Or may I take my lunch break?" Yates held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Go ahead. I can manage for an hour." Olive took her small lunch pail and went out back to the little garden area behind the store. It was one of her favorite spots, shaded by a large cottonwood tree and relatively private. She sat on the bench Patterson had built years ago and unwrapped her bread and cheese. She had been eating for about 10 minutes when the back door opened and Yates emerged carrying his own lunch. "May I join you?" he asked. Olive wanted to say no, but could not think of a polite way to refuse. "It is your property." Yates sat on the other end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Then Yates said, "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday." "Which part?" "About there being only survivors and corpses, no fair fights." "What about it?" "I think you are wrong." Olive turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. "Is that so?" "Yes, I think there are fair fights. I think there is honor and decency in the world. I think there is more than just survival." "You think," Olive said, "that life is kinder than it actually is. That will change with time." "I am 32 years old, Miss Dalton. I have been on my own since I was 17. I have seen hard things. Lost people I cared about, been betrayed by people I trusted, but I still believe there is good in the world. I still believe in love and friendship and hope." "Then you are a fool," Olive said, but without heat. "Love is a foolish dream. It does not exist. There is only need and convenience and proximity. People pair off because they are afraid to be alone, not because of some grand emotion." Yates set down his lunch and turned to face her fully. "Who hurt you? That is none of your concern. Maybe not. But someone did. Someone hurt you badly enough that you have decided to wall yourself off from every good thing life has to offer. That makes me sad." "Your sadness is wasted on me," Olive said. "I am perfectly content with my life." "Are you? Because from where I am sitting, you look more lonely than content." Anger flared in Olive's chest. "You have known me for one day, Mr. Irwin. You do not know anything about me or what I feel, and I would appreciate it if you would keep your observations to yourself." She stood abruptly, gathering her lunch pail. Yates stood as well, and she saw genuine regret in his eyes. "You are right," he said. "I overstepped. I apologize." Olive nodded curtly and went back inside, her appetite gone. She spent the rest of the day avoiding conversation with Yates beyond what was necessary for work. He seemed to sense her mood and did not push, which she grudgingly appreciated. But that night, lying in bed, she found herself thinking about what he had said. Love is a foolish dream. She had said it with such certainty, such conviction. Because she believed it. She had to believe it. The alternative was too painful to consider. The days fell into a pattern. Olive arrived at the store each morning, worked efficiently alongside Yates, and left each evening without lingering. They spoke about inventory and customers and the business of running the store, but nothing personal. Yates seemed to have taken her rebuke to heart and no longer asked probing questions. Saturday came, and Yates closed the store early to attend Clara Winters's gathering. Olive went back to her room and spent the evening mending clothes and reading an old newspaper someone had left at the store. It was a perfectly adequate way to spend an evening. She told herself she did not wonder what Yates was doing, whether Clara was batting her eyelashes at him, whether he was enjoying himself. On Monday, Clara came into the store glowing. "Mr. Irwin is such a wonderful dancer," she announced to Olive, "and so gentlemanly. He sat with my father for over an hour discussing ranching and business. Father was very impressed." "How nice," Olive said, focusing on folding the fabric Clara had selected. "I think he will fit into our community wonderfully," Clara continued. "And he is so handsome, is he not? Those blue eyes." "I had not noticed," Olive lied. "Will that be everything?" After Clara left, Yates came out from the back where he had been unpacking a shipment. "She is persistent, I will give her that," he said. "She wants to marry you," Olive said. "You could do worse. Her father's ranch is profitable, and she is pleasant enough if you can tolerate the empty chatter." "That is not exactly a ringing endorsement." Yates leaned against the counter. "Besides, I am not looking to marry for convenience. When I marry, it will be because I am in love." "Then you will likely never marry," Olive said, "because love, as I have told you, is a foolish dream. And as I have told you, you are wrong." Yates's voice was gentle but firm. "But I am willing to accept that you do not believe in it. I just wish I knew why. My reasons are my own." "They are," Yates agreed. "But that does not mean I will stop wondering." Over the following weeks, Yates proved himself to be an excellent storekeeper and a frustrating human being. Excellent because he was fair with customers, smart about ordering, and willing to work long hours. Frustrating because he seemed determined to prove that love and goodness existed, as if her skepticism were a personal challenge to overcome. He was kind to the children who came into the store, slipping them peppermint sticks when their parents were not looking. He extended credit to families he knew were struggling, never mentioning it or making them feel ashamed. He broke up a fight between two ranch hands outside the store with calm words rather than violence. He brought coffee and fresh bread to share during their lunch breaks, sitting in the garden and talking about innocuous things like the weather and the quality of the recent shipments. And slowly, despite herself, Olive began to soften toward him. Not in any romantic sense, she told herself, but he was growing into something like a friend, though she would not have admitted that aloud. He made her laugh occasionally with dry observations about their more difficult customers. He listened when she talked about ideas for the store, treating her opinions with respect. He never again asked intrusive questions about her past. It was dangerous, this softening. Olive recognized it and tried to guard against it, but Yates was like water wearing away stone, gentle but persistent. One afternoon in early autumn, about 2 months after Yates had arrived in Springerville, a man came into the store who made Olive's blood run cold. He was tall and heavy, with small eyes and thick hands. He looked nothing like the man from her past, yet something about his manner, the way he looked at her, triggered a visceral response. "Help you?" Yates asked, stepping forward when Olive failed to speak. "Need supplies," the man grunted. He shoved a list across the counter. Yates glanced at Olive, and she saw the question in his eyes. She managed a small nod, and he began gathering the items. The man stood too close to the counter, his gaze following Olive as she moved around the store. Her skin crawled. "That will be $8, Yates said when everything was assembled. The man paid, but before leaving he looked directly at Olive. "You are a pretty thing. Maybe I will see you around town." After he left, Olive found she was gripping the edge of the counter hard enough that her knuckles were white. She forced herself to release it, to breathe normally. "Olive," Yates said quietly, "are you all right?" "Fine." "You are not fine. You went pale as a sheet when he came in." "I said I am fine." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Yates was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If he bothers you again, tell me. I will handle it. I can handle myself." "I do not doubt that, but you do not have to." Olive looked at him, then really looked at him. He meant it. He would protect her if she let him. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "But it will not be necessary. He is just passing through." But the man, whose name she learned was Virgil Kane, was not just passing through. He had been hired on at one of the ranches and apparently planned to stay. Over the next week, he came into the store 3 more times, always when he knew Olive would be there, always finding excuses to linger and stare. Yates noticed. After the 3rd visit, he said, "I do not like how that man looks at you." "I do not like it either, but there is nothing to be done about it. I could speak to him." "And say what? That he is not allowed to shop here because he makes me uncomfortable? That would be absurd." "Your comfort is not absurd," Yates said firmly, "but I will respect your wishes. Just promise me you will not walk home alone if you stay late." "I have been walking home alone for 3 years. Things change. Let me walk with you, or get Tom from the livery to do it, please." The concern in his voice touched something in Olive that she had thought was long dead. She found herself nodding. "Very well. If it makes you feel better." "It does." True to his word, Yates began walking Olive home each evening. At first she protested that it was unnecessary, that he was going out of his way. His boarding house was in the opposite direction from the laundry, but he insisted, and eventually she stopped arguing. The walks became one of the parts of the day Olive most looked forward to, though she would not have admitted it. Yates talked about his plans for the store, asked her opinion on various matters, told stories about his cattle driving days. She found herself talking more than she had in years, sharing observations about the town and its people, even occasionally offering glimpses into her thoughts on things beyond the immediate and practical. "You have a good way of seeing people," Yates observed one evening as they walked through the cooling air. Autumn was settling into the mountains, painting the aspen trees gold. "What do you mean, you notice things? Like how Mrs. Chen always buys extra flour when her arthritis is bad because she is baking more to work through the pain. Or how young Billy Stevens always looks at the penny candy but never asks for it because he knows his mother cannot afford it. Those are just observations." "They are compassion," Yates corrected. "You notice because you care, even if you pretend you do not." "I do not pretend anything. I simply do not indulge in sentimentality." "Is caring for people sentimental?" "Often, yes. Caring leaves you vulnerable." Yates slowed his pace, looking at her in the fading light. "Is that what happened to you? You cared for someone and they hurt you?" Olive stiffened. "I told you I do not discuss my past." "I know, and I respect that. But Olive, keeping everything locked inside is not protecting you. It is just making you lonely." I am not lonely. Everyone is lonely sometimes, even me. This surprised her. But you are friends with half the town already. Friends are not the same as connection, Yates said. Real connection requires vulnerability. Requires letting people see who you really are. I have been trying to do that since I arrived here, trying to build something real. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Because I spent 6 years on cattle drives living on the surface of things. Temporary connections, temporary places. I am tired of temporary. I want roots. I want to matter to people and have them matter to me. I want love. There was that word again. Love. Olive shook her head. You are setting yourself up for disappointment. Maybe, Yates acknowledged. But I would rather be disappointed reaching for something beautiful than safe and alone. They had reached the laundry. Olive stood at the door to her room, aware that something had shifted in this conversation, though she could not quite name what. "Good night, Yates," she said quietly. "Good night, Olive." She watched him walk away, his tall form gradually disappearing into the dusk. Then she went inside and sat on her bed, feeling strangely unsettled. Yates believed in love, believed it was real and worth pursuing. He was wrong, of course. He had to be wrong. Because if he was right, if love was real, then that meant she had closed herself off from something precious. And that thought was more than she could bear. The next day was Sunday. Olive attended church as usual, sitting in her customary spot near the back. She was surprised when Yates slid into the pew beside her just before the service started. "Morning," he said quietly. "Good morning. You usually sit with the Winters family. Clara was becoming too possessive of my time. I thought a change would be wise." He smiled slightly. "Hope you do not mind." Olive did not mind. In fact, she found she was glad for his presence. They sat through the service, and when it came time to sing, she was startled to hear that Yates had a pleasant baritone voice. She had never heard him sing before. After the service, as people milled about outside talking, Clara approached with a tight smile. "Mr. Irwin, I saved you a seat with us." "I appreciate that, Miss Winters, but I was comfortable where I was." Yates's voice was polite but firm. Clara's eyes flickered to Olive, and something cold passed across her face. "I see. Well, I hope you both enjoy your afternoon." She turned and walked away, her back rigid. "She is angry," Olive observed. "She will recover. I should have made my lack of romantic interest clearer from the start." They walked back toward the center of town together. Most businesses were closed on Sunday, but Yates had mentioned he wanted to do some work in the store. Olive found herself offering to help, though she could not have said why. It was her day off. "You do not have to do that," Yates said. "I know, but I do not have other plans." They spent the afternoon organizing the stock room, a task that Patterson had always neglected. It was dusty, tedious work, but Olive found she did not mind. Yates told stories as they worked, making her laugh with his descriptions of various disasters on the cattle drives. A stampede caused by a sneeze. A cook who could not actually cook. A horse that turned out to be smarter than its rider. "You like that life," Olive said. It was not a question. "I did," Yates admitted. "There was a freedom to it, but it was not sustainable, and like I said, I wanted roots." "Have you found them here?" Yates looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I am starting to." They worked in silence for a while after that, but it was a comfortable silence. When they finished, the sun was setting. Yates locked up the store, and they stood outside in the golden light. "Thank you for your help today," he said. "You are welcome." "Olive, can I ask you something?" She tensed, but nodded. "You ever think about what it would be like to let someone in, to trust someone again?" The question was so close to her recent thoughts that it startled her. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it is easier not to. Easier is not always better. In my experience, it is." "What happened?" Yates asked gently. "What made you believe that love was impossible?" Olive looked away, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. For 3 years she had kept her past locked away. She had not spoken of it to anyone. But something about this moment, standing here with Yates in the fading light, made her want to tell him, just a little. "I was engaged once," she said quietly. "When I was 21. His name was Robert. He was charming and attentive. He told me he loved me. I believed him." She paused, and Yates waited, not pushing. "2 weeks before our wedding, I discovered he was already married. He had a wife in Denver. I was just a diversion. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I should have known better than to think a man like him would actually marry someone like me." "Someone like you?" Yates's voice was tight with anger. "Someone with no family, no connections, no money. I was an orphan who worked as a seamstress. I was convenient and I was naive. He taught me not to be naive anymore. Olive. After that I left, came here, started over. And I swore I would never be that foolish again, never trust someone who claimed to love me, because love is just a word people use to get what they want." Yates was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Robert was a bastard and a liar, but he was not love. What he did to you was not love." "How would you know? Love is just a concept. It does not actually exist." "It does exist," Yates said with conviction, "and I am going to prove it to you." Olive looked at him in surprise. "What? You told me love was a foolish dream." "Well, I am going to spend however long it takes showing you that it is real, not with words because words are cheap, but with actions." "Yates, you cannot." "I can and I will," he interrupted. "Not because I expect anything from you. Not because I am trying to manipulate you into feeling something you do not feel, but because you deserve to know that real love exists. Even if you never want it for yourself, you should at least know it is possible." "That is absurd." "Maybe, but I am going to do it anyway." He smiled, and it was the most genuine smile she had seen from him. "Consider it a long-term project. You are going to be disappointed," Olive warned. "We will see." "Good night, Olive." He walked away, leaving her standing in front of the laundry with her mind spinning. Yates Irwin was either the most foolish man she had ever met or the most stubborn. Possibly both. But as she went to bed that night, she found herself feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Curiosity. What would Yates do? How did one prove that love was real? And more unsettling than anything else, what if he was right? The next morning, Olive arrived at the store to find a steaming cup of coffee waiting for her at the counter, fixed exactly the way she liked it, with just a touch of sugar. Yates was already working, arranging a display of the new merchandise that had arrived on Friday. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Coffee is hot." "Thank you." Olive took the cup, sipping cautiously. "It was perfect. You did not have to do this." "I know, I wanted to. It was such a small thing." But it set the tone for what followed. Every day there was something. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but small kindnesses that showed he was paying attention. Her favorite flower, a wild aster, left on the counter in a simple jar. A new ledger when hers was nearly full, before she had to ask. The heavy shipments unloaded before she arrived, so she would not have to lift them. When Mrs. Chen came in looking exhausted and mentioned her arthritis was acting up, Yates delivered her purchases to the hotel himself, refusing payment for the delivery. When Billy Stevens's mother came in to buy cloth for his birthday shirt, Yates quietly reduced the price, claiming there was a tear in the fabric that Olive knew was not there. He did these things without fanfare, without expecting recognition. He did them because, as he told Olive one day, "This is what caring about people looks like. This is love in action." "This is just being decent," Olive protested. "Decency and love are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I would argue that real love is built on consistent decency. Grand gestures are easy. It is the small, daily choices to put someone else first that matter. Despite her skepticism, Olive could not help but notice how the people of Springerville responded to Yates. They trusted him. They brought their problems to him. When the schoolteacher fell ill and the town needed someone to help organize a fundraiser for her care, they turned to Yates. When two ranchers got into a dispute over water rights, they asked him to mediate. "You have become the unofficial mayor," Olive observed one evening as they walked to the laundry. "I just try to help where I can." "Why? What do you gain from it?" Yates looked at her with surprise. "Gain? Olive, not everything is a transaction. I help because these people are my neighbors. My community. When they hurt, I hurt. When they succeed, I am happy. That is what it means to care about people." "That sounds exhausting." "Sometimes it is," he admitted. "But it is also fulfilling in a way that living only for yourself never could be." Olive wanted to argue, but she found she could not. Because watching Yates over the past weeks, she had seen something she had not expected. He was happy. Genuinely happy. Not in the manic, desperate way of people trying to convince themselves they were content, but in a deep, settled way that came from a sense of purpose and connection. It unsettled her. It challenged everything she had believed for the past 3 years. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and cold winds. The store stayed busy with people stocking up on supplies. Virgil Kane continued to make Olive uncomfortable, though he had not done anything overtly threatening. He just watched her with those small, calculating eyes whenever he came in. One day in December, Kane came in drunk. It was mid-afternoon and he stumbled through the door, reeking of whiskey. "Pretty Olive," he slurred, "come have a drink with me." "The store does not serve alcohol, Mr. Kane," Olive said coldly, "and you need to leave. Do not be like that." He moved closer to the counter, reaching for her hand. Before Olive could react, Yates was there, stepping between them. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you do it." Kane's face twisted with anger. "This is none of your concern, storekeeper. Olive's safety is very much my concern. Now leave before I have the sheriff remove you." "Sheriff is probably drunk himself," Kane spat, but he backed toward the door. "This is not over," he said to Olive, then left. Olive realized she was shaking. Yates turned to her immediately. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thank you." "I meant what I said. Your safety matters to me." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why do you care? I am just your employee." "You are not just anything," Yates said firmly. "You are a person who deserves to be treated with respect and protected from men like Kane. You are someone I consider a friend, and you are someone who has started to matter to me very much." Olive stared at him, her heart pounding. "Yates, I am not asking you to feel the same way," he said quickly. "I am just telling you the truth. You matter to me. Your happiness matters. Your safety matters. That is what love looks like, Olive, caring about someone else's well-being as much as your own. That is not love, that is just friendship. Love includes friendship, but it is also more. It is commitment. It is choosing someone day after day, even when it is hard." Olive shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. "I cannot talk about this right now." "That is fine. But think about it, please. Think about whether maybe, just maybe, you have been wrong about love." That night, Olive barely slept. Her mind kept replaying Yates's words, "You matter to me." She could not remember the last time someone had said that to her and meant it. Her parents had died when she was 12. She had grown up in an orphanage where she was just one of many, a burden to be fed and clothed until she was old enough to work. Robert had claimed she mattered, but that had been a lie. But Yates had spent months showing her through his actions that he meant what he said. He had been patient with her prickly nature. He had never pushed her beyond what she could handle. He had protected her without making her feel weak. He had made her laugh. He had listened when she talked. He had valued her opinions. He had, she realized with a jolt of terror, been loving her. And she had been so determined not to see it that she had missed what was right in front of her. The question was, what did she do with this realization? The next day, Olive was quiet as she worked. Yates noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Are you all right?" he asked during their lunch break in the garden, despite the cold. "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday. And I do not know what to think. You have shown me kindness, respect, patience. But is that really love? Or is it just you being a good person?" "It can be both," Yates said. "Olive, I will be honest with you. Somewhere over these past months I fell in love with you, not because I planned to. Not because I expected anything in return, but because you are smart and strong and brave. Because you have survived things that would have broken lesser people. Because underneath all your defenses, you have a good heart that you try to hide." Olive's chest felt tight. "You should not love me. I do not know how to love you back. I am not asking you to, not yet, maybe not ever. I just want you to know that love is real. It is not a foolish dream. It is here right now in this garden. I love you, Olive Dalton, and I will keep loving you whether you believe in it or not." Tears pricked at Olive's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in 3 years. She would not cry now. This is not fair. Life rarely is. But that does not mean we should give up on the good things. What if I hurt you? What if I cannot give you what you want? "Then I will be hurt," Yates said simply. "But that is my risk to take, not yours. You do not owe me anything, Olive. Your presence in my life, your friendship, that is enough. Everything else is just hope." Olive stood abruptly. "I need to think. I need time." "Take all the time you need." She walked away from the garden, away from the store, out into the cold December air. She walked without direction, her mind spinning. Yates loved her. He had said it simply, without drama or pressure. He loved her and expected nothing in return. That was not how love was supposed to work, according to her experience. Love was supposed to be selfish and demanding and conditional, but Yates had shown her something different. He had shown her love that was patient and kind and giving. Love that served rather than took. Love that protected without controlling. Love that respected her choices even when they hurt him. And she realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that she had started to love him back. Despite her best efforts, despite all her walls, Yates Irwin had slipped past her defenses. He had shown her that love was not a foolish dream. It was real. And it was terrifying, because loving someone meant being vulnerable. It meant risking the kind of pain she had sworn never to feel again. It meant trusting that Yates was different from Robert, that his words were true, that he would not betray her. Could she do it? Could she take that risk? Olive found herself at the small church at the edge of town. She rarely came here outside of Sunday services, but something drew her inside now. The building was empty and quiet. She sat in a pew near the front, staring at the simple wooden cross on the wall. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered into the silence. "I do not know how to trust again. I do not know how to love." There was no answer, of course. But sitting there in the quiet, Olive felt something shift inside her. A small loosening of the tight knot of fear and pain she had carried for so long. Maybe she did not have to know how to do this. Maybe she just had to be willing to try. She stood and walked back out into the cold. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains pink and gold. It was beautiful, and for the first time in years, she let herself appreciate it. Let herself feel something other than wariness and self-protection. When she returned to the store, it was already closed. But she could see light in the back and knew Yates was still there. She knocked on the door. He opened it immediately, concern on his face. "Olive, is everything all right?" "No," she said honestly. Everything is terrifying, but I think maybe that is how it is supposed to be." She stepped inside and he closed the door behind her. They stood in the quiet store, facing each other. "I do not know how to do this," Olive said. "I do not know how to be loved or how to love someone back. Robert taught me that I was not worthy of love, and I believed him. I built walls to keep everyone out because that felt safer than risking that kind of pain again." "Olive, let me finish," she said. "You have spent months showing me that I was wrong, about love, about myself, about what is possible. You have been patient and kind, and you have never asked for anything in return. That is not something I understand, but I want to. I want to try." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think I love you," Olive said, the words feeling both strange and right. "I am saying that I am terrified, but I am willing to take the risk if you are. I am saying that you were right. Love is not a foolish dream, it is real, and I want to choose it. I want to choose you." Yates's face transformed with joy. He stepped forward, taking her hands gently in his. "Olive Dalton, you are the bravest person I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice. You cannot promise that. You are right. I cannot promise there will not be hard times or that I will not make mistakes. But I can promise that I will love you through all of it, that I will choose you every day, that your happiness and well-being will always matter to me." "That sounds like a pretty good promise," Olive said, and she felt a smile tugging at her lips. "May I kiss you?" Yates asked. Olive nodded, and he leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, and she felt something inside her that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. When they pulled apart, Yates was grinning. "I have wanted to do that for months. I am glad you waited until I was ready. I would have waited years if necessary. That is a foolish thing to say, maybe, but love makes fools of us all." Olive laughed, and it felt good, natural, right. "I suppose it does." They stood there in the quiet store, hands still joined, and Olive felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind, but the steady, quiet kind that came from trust. She was still scared, but she was also happy, and that was enough. The months that followed were not perfect. Olive struggled sometimes with her instinct to push Yates away, to retreat behind her walls when things felt too vulnerable. And Yates had his own struggles, learning to balance his natural optimism with respect for Olive's need for caution. But they worked through it together. They talked, really talked about their fears and hopes and dreams. Olive told him more about her past, about the loneliness of the orphanage and the betrayal of Robert. Yates told her about losing his parents to influenza, about the guilt he felt for leaving his brother to run the family store alone, about his own failed romance years ago that had taught him what he did and did not want in a partner. They discovered they both loved reading and spent evenings trading books and discussing them. They learned that they were both terrible at chess, but enjoyed playing anyway. They found that they worked together seamlessly in the store, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's ideas. And slowly, Olive began to truly believe that this was real, that Yates's love was not conditional or manipulative but genuine and lasting. In the spring of 1884, Yates asked Olive to marry him. It was not a grand gesture. They were in the garden behind the store during their lunch break, and he simply said, "I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Olive looked at him, this man who had spent over a year proving that love was real, and said, "Yes." They were married in June in the small church where Olive had sat alone that December day. The whole town turned out for the celebration. Even Clara Winters came and graciously wished them well, having found her own suitor in a rancher from a neighboring county. as Olive stood beside Yates, promising to love and honor him. She thought about how much had changed since that hot August day when a bullet had shattered Mr. Patterson's window. She had been so certain then that she knew how the world worked, that love was a lie and safety came from keeping everyone at a distance. But Yates had shown her something different. He had shown her that love was not about pretty words or grand gestures, but about consistent choice. Choosing to care for someone every day, choosing to put their needs alongside your own, choosing to stay even when things were hard. He had spent over a year showing her it was real, and now she finally believed him. After the wedding, they moved into a small house on the edge of town that Yates had purchased. It was modest but comfortable, with a garden where they could grow vegetables and flowers. Olive continued to work at the store, now as a partner rather than an employee. They ran the business together, and it thrived under their joint management. Life was not without its challenges. The territorial economy had its ups and downs. There were harsh winters and dry summers that affected the ranchers and thus their customer base. Virgil Kane caused trouble a few more times before finally leaving the area after he was caught stealing. The sheriff, despite his drinking, eventually ran him out of town. But through it all, Yates and Olive faced everything together. When she had nightmares about Robert, Yates held her and reminded her she was safe. When he struggled with doubts about whether he had made the right choice leaving his brother behind in Kansas, she listened and reassured him that he had built something meaningful here in Springerville. They learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to forgive when they were hurt. They learned that marriage was work, but work that was worth doing. They learned that love was not a static thing but something that grew and changed and deepened over time. In the spring of 1885, Olive discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. She had never had a family, not really. What if she did not know how to be a mother? What if she passed on her damage to her child? Yates, sensing her turmoil, held her close. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he said firmly. "You are strong and wise, and you will teach our child to be brave. What if I am not enough? You are more than enough, and you will not be doing this alone. We are partners, remember." In business and in life. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Yates's father. Holding her son for the first time, Olive felt a fierce, protective love that was almost overwhelming. This tiny person depended on her completely. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Look at what we made," Yates said softly, gazing down at his son with wonder. "Look at this beautiful life that came from our love." Olive looked up at him, this man who had changed everything. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing me that love was real, for not giving up on me, for teaching me that I deserved good things." "You always deserved good things," Yates said. "I just helped you see it." Motherhood transformed Olive in ways she had not expected. She had thought that opening herself to love with Yates was the ultimate act of trust and vulnerability, but having a child took it to another level. She found herself fiercely protective, staying up nights when Samuel had colic, worrying over every cough and fever. But she also discovered depths of joy she had not known existed. Samuel's first smile, his first laugh, his first wobbly steps, all of these milestones filled her heart in ways she could not have imagined. And watching Yates with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he brought to fatherhood, only deepened her love for him. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of life in Springerville. The store continued to prosper. They expanded, adding a section for farm equipment and another for ladies' ready-made dresses. Olive proved to have a keen eye for merchandising, and her suggestions about inventory and display consistently increased sales. In 1887, their second child was born, a daughter they named Grace. She had Olive's serious demeanor even as a baby, studying the world with solemn eyes. Samuel adored his little sister, and Olive loved watching them play together. The house that had seemed adequately sized when they married now felt crowded with two active children. Yates began planning an addition, working on it in the evenings and on Sundays after church. Olive would bring him lemonade and sit on the half-built porch, watching him work and marveling at how much her life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked one evening, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just how different things are now from how they used to be," Olive said. "How different I am. You are not so different. You are still the strong, stubborn woman I fell in love with. I am happier now. Softer, maybe. I would have hated that once. I would have seen it as weakness. And now I know it is not weakness to let people in. It is not weakness to trust. It takes more strength to be vulnerable than it does to hide behind walls." Yates sat down beside her, taking her hand. "I am proud of you. I know how hard you have worked to get to this place. I could not have done it without you. You showed me it was possible." "We showed each other," Yates corrected. "You taught me things too, about resilience, about not taking the good things for granted, about fighting for what matters." Olive leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. This was what love looked like, she thought. Not the frantic passion of new romance, though they still had that too, but this steady, comfortable partnership, this deep knowing of another person. This choice, made every day to build a life together. By 1890, Springerville had grown considerably. The territory was moving toward statehood, though that would not happen for more than 2 decades yet. But there was a sense of permanence settling over the town, a feeling that this was not just a temporary outpost, but a real community with a future. Yates became increasingly involved in town affairs. He was elected to the town council and worked on initiatives to improve the school and bring a real doctor to Springerville. Olive worked alongside him, organizing fundraisers and coordinating volunteer efforts. They had become pillars of the community, respected and liked. Their children grew. Samuel was a bright, curious boy who loved books almost as much as his mother did. He talked about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Grace was more adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the mountains with the other children. She reminded Olive of herself at that age, before life had taught her to be cautious. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Olive and Yates sat on their finished porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Olive said, "Do you remember when I told you that love was a foolish dream?" "I remember," Yates said. "I remember thinking I would prove you wrong. You did. You spent years showing me it was real. And not just showing me, but being patient while I learned to believe it. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that. You have thanked me every day just by choosing to stay, by building this life with me, by loving me back." "I do love you," Olive said. "More than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I look at our life and I cannot believe this is real, that I get to have this." "You deserve it," Yates said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness we have built." Olive turned to look at him, this man who had changed her entire world. "I was so afraid back then, afraid to trust, afraid to hope, afraid to want anything because wanting meant you could be hurt when it was taken away." "Are you still afraid?" "Sometimes," Olive admitted. "I think part of me always will be, but it is different now. The fear does not control me anymore, and when I am afraid, I remember that I do not have to face it alone. I have you." "Always," Yates promised, "for the rest of our lives." They sat there as the stars filled the sky, hands joined, hearts joined, two people who had found each other against the odds. Olive thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the lonely orphan to the betrayed woman to the defended heart who thought love was impossible. And then Yates had arrived with his steady patience and his unshakable belief that love was real. He had been right. Love was not a foolish dream. It was work and choice and commitment. It was showing up every day. It was patient and kind, and yes, sometimes it was hard. But it was also the most real thing Olive had ever experienced. The years continued to unfold. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the Springerville school. Grace surprised everyone by developing an interest in medicine, and when she was old enough, she apprenticed with the doctor who had finally settled in town. Yates's hair began to silver at the temples, and Olive found she loved him even more with the lines that appeared around his eyes. They were laugh lines, proof of a life well lived. She hoped she had similar lines, evidence that she had learned to find joy. The store remained the center of their working life, though they eventually hired help so they could spend more time with their growing family. They became grandparents when Samuel married and had a daughter of his own. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Olive marveled at the continuing thread of love and life. "What should she call you?" Samuel asked. "Grandmother, grandma." "Whatever she wants," Olive said, gazing down at the tiny face. "I do not mind." Later, when she and Yates were alone, he said, "You have come so far from the woman who said she did not know how to love. I had a good teacher." "We taught each other," Yates said, echoing what he had said years before. "That is what love is, continually teaching each other to be better." As they grew older, they fell into new rhythms: morning coffee on the porch, evening walks through town waving to neighbors, Sunday dinners with their children and grandchildren. The store was eventually passed on to a young couple who reminded Olive a bit of herself and Yates, full of hope and plans. In 1905, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. It was touch and go for a week, and Olive barely left his side. She sat by his bed, holding his hand, and whispered fierce demands that he not leave her. Not yet. Not when they still had so much life to live. "Not planning on it," he managed to rasp out. "Still have to prove to you that love is real." "You already did that," Olive said, tears streaming down her face. "Years ago, you showed me. You proved it, so you have to get better because I need you, I love you." And he did get better, slowly but surely. The doctor said it was his stubborn will to live that pulled him through. Olive knew it was their love, the same force that had sustained them for over 20 years. After that scare, they both became more conscious of time. They took trips together, visiting the Grand Canyon and traveling back to Kansas so Yates could see his brother one more time. They spent long hours talking with their children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked Olive one day. They were sitting in the garden, the same garden where Yates had first declared his love all those years ago. Olive considered the question carefully. "I regret the years I wasted believing I was not worthy of love. I regret how I hurt your father in the beginning by pushing him away. But everything else, all the hard parts and the struggles, I do not regret any of it. It all led me here, to this life. To you and your brother, to your father. He really loves you," Grace said. "I hope I find something like what you two have." "You will," Olive said with certainty. "And when you do, remember that love is a choice you make every day. It is not always easy, but it is always worth it." The seasons continued their cycle. Spring blossoms gave way to summer heat, which yielded to autumn gold and winter snow. Each year brought changes. New babies were born. Old friends passed on. The territory finally became a state in 1912, and there were celebrations throughout Arizona. Through it all, Olive and Yates remained constants in each other's lives. They still disagreed sometimes, still had to work through hurt feelings and misunderstandings, but they had learned long ago how to fight fair and how to forgive. They had learned that love was not the absence of conflict, but the commitment to work through it together. On their 30th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration. There were speeches and toasts, and Olive felt embarrassed by all the attention. But she was also touched by how many people spoke about the impact she and Yates had had on Springerville. "You showed us what a good marriage looks like," Mrs. Chen said. "You worked together, respected each other, built something lasting. You created a store that was more than just a business," young Billy Stevens, now grown and working at the bank, added. "It was a gathering place, a place where people felt welcomed and valued. You have been examples of how to live with integrity and kindness," the current mayor said. "Springerville is a better place because of both of you." When it was time for them to speak, Yates stood and pulled Olive up with him. "My wife and I thank you for these kind words," he said. "But the truth is, you all taught us just as much as we might have taught you. You showed us the meaning of community. You welcomed us and made us family, and you gave us the privilege of being part of something larger than ourselves." He turned to Olive. "But mostly, I want to thank this woman beside me. 30 years ago, she told me that love was a foolish dream. I spent years showing her it was real, and she spent years teaching me what true courage looks like, the courage to trust again after being hurt, the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to choose love every single day." Olive felt tears on her cheeks as Yates continued. "Olive Irwin, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, my home. Everything good in my life stems from the day you decided to take a chance on me. Thank you for 30 years. Here is to 30 more." The crowd cheered, and Olive found herself laughing and crying at the same time. "I do not know if we have 30 more years," she said when the noise died down, "but however many we have, I will spend them loving you. They might not have had 30 more years, but they had many good ones." They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. They saw Springerville continue to develop and modernize. They adapted to changes while holding on to what mattered most. In 1920, Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 69. Olive was devastated but not destroyed. She grieved deeply, but she also knew profound gratitude for the life they had shared. He had kept his promise. He had loved her every day. He had shown her that love was real. She lived for another 5 years, surrounded by family and friends. She spent her time gardening and reading and telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days in Springerville. She talked about their grandfather, about the kind, stubborn man who had refused to let her hide from love. "Was he perfect?" one great-grandchild asked. "No," Olive said with a smile. "He was human. He made mistakes. He got frustrated sometimes. He could be too optimistic and too trusting. But he was perfectly himself, and he loved me perfectly, which does not mean without flaw, but rather completely and consistently. That is what mattered." "Did you love him perfectly too?" "I tried," Olive said. "Every day I tried. That is all we can do. Try. Choose to love. Choose to stay. Choose to keep building something together." When Olive passed away in 1925 at the age of 66, the town mourned the loss of one of its founding members. But they also celebrated a life well lived. A life that had started in loneliness and pain but had been transformed by love. At her funeral, Samuel stood to speak about his mother. "She told my father once that love was a foolish dream," he said. "He spent years showing her it was real. And in doing so, they showed all of us. They showed us what commitment looks like, what partnership looks like, what it means to choose love every single day through good times and hard times." They built a legacy not just in the store they ran or the community service they provided, but in the example they set. Love is real. Love is worth fighting for. Love transforms us and makes us better. That was my parents' gift to all of us. Olive and Yates were buried side by side in the Springerville cemetery, on a hill overlooking the town they had helped build. Their graves were marked with simple stones, but they did not need elaborate monuments. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the countless lives they had touched, in the example they had set. They had shown that love was not a foolish dream. It was the most real thing in the world. It was patient and kind and enduring. It was choice and commitment and work. It was sacrifice and compromise and forgiveness. It was laughter and tears and everything in between. Yates had spent years proving it to Olive, and together they had spent a lifetime proving it to everyone around them. Love was real, and it changed everything.